97% of arranged marriages in organised crime families end in divorce, abandonment or murder within the first year. The women either flee in terror, die from the stress, or disappear entirely when they realise what they've signed up for. At 3:42 a.m. on a rain-soaked Tuesday in November, Don Salvatore Torino was about to discover that the remaining 3% could change everything. The private dining room at Romano's hadn't seen this much tension since the Castellano massacre of '98. Salvatore sat at the head of the mahogany table, his Armani suit wrinkled from 18 hours of crisis management, his usually perfect silver hair dishevelled from running his hands through it too many times. The man who controlled half of Chicago's waterfront looked like he was drowning. "Explain it to me again," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that made grown men confess their sins. "Because I must have misheard." Marco Benedetti, his consigliere for 20 years, loosened his tie with trembling fingers. The rain lashed against the windows of the restaurant's private room, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees with each word he spoke. "The Morettis have aligned with the federal prosecutors. Full cooperation. Names, dates, financial records." Marco's voice cracked slightly. "They're offering everything in exchange for witness protection and immunity." Salvatore's dark eyes never blinked. "And?" "Judge Catherine Bellecourt has the final say on their deal. She's agreed to provide protection and legitimacy to our operations, but only through a marriage alliance with her daughter Rebecca." Marco swallowed hard. The ceremony must take place before sunrise, or she withdraws the offer and lets the Morettis burn us all. The silence that followed was suffocating. The other men around the table, capos who had survived gang wars, federal investigations, and hostile takeovers, looked like they wanted to disappear into the expensive wallpaper. "Before sunrise," Salvatore repeated, checking his Rolex. "That's 14 hours. 13 hours and 43 minutes, corrected Anthony Rossi, his lieutenant. The man immediately regretted speaking when Salvatore's gaze fixed on him like a sniper's crosshairs. "And where is the judge's daughter now?" Marco's face went pale. "Geneva. She boarded a private jet 6 hours ago when she heard about the arrangement." Salvatore stood slowly, his 6-foot frame unfolding with predatory grace. Every man in the room tensed. When the Don moved like that, someone usually ended up in the river. "Let me understand this clearly," Salvatore said, walking to the rain-streaked window. "The Morettis are cooperating with the feds. Judge Bellecourt will protect us from federal prosecution, but only if I marry her daughter. Said daughter has fled the country rather than marry me. And if I don't produce a bride by sunrise, we all spend the rest of our lives in maximum security prison." "We've reached out to other families," Anthony offered quickly. "The Torinos in Boston have a cousin who won't arrive until Thursday. The Calabrases in Detroit have 3 daughters, all of whom are either married, in rehab, or currently wanted by the FBI. Salvatore turned from the window, his expression deadly calm. "What about local options?" Marco shuffled through his papers with desperate efficiency. "We approached the mayor's daughter. She's having a nervous breakdown. The senator's niece locked herself in her apartment and called her lawyers, and Roberto's sister—" He trailed off. "What about Roberto's sister?" "She tried to call the FBI tip line." The sound that came from Salvatore's throat wasn't quite human. It was the growl of a predator realizing he was trapped in a cage. "Bring me solutions," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "I don't care if you have to kidnap someone from a convent. I don't care if you have to import a mail-order bride from Siberia. Bring me a wife before sunrise, or we're all dead men." That was when Sophia Martinez entered the room, carrying a silver tray of espresso cups with hands that never trembled. She was the kind of woman most men looked through rather than at. Average height, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing the standard black uniform of Romano's waitstaff. Her makeup was minimal, designed to be invisible, and her movements were efficient without calling attention to themselves. She had perfected the art of being functionally invisible in a world where being noticed could be dangerous. But Salvatore noticed everything. It was why he was still alive after 25 years in a business that buried most men before they turned 40. He noticed the way her hands stayed steady while every other staff member had fled the moment his security team arrived. He noticed how she served the espresso without making eye contact, but somehow knew exactly who took sugar and who didn't. He noticed the small callus on her right index finger that suggested she wrote by hand frequently. And he noticed that when Anthony Rossi knocked over his water glass during a particularly dramatic gesture, she moved to clean it without being asked, her movements precise and unflappable. Most importantly, he noticed that she was listening. Her face remained professionally neutral, but her posture had the subtle alertness of someone processing information rather than simply waiting for orders. "That's all," Marco said as she finished serving. "Thank you." Sophia nodded once and turned to leave, but Salvatore's voice stopped her at the door. "Miss?" She turned slowly, her dark eyes meeting his for the first time that evening. They were intelligent eyes, he realized, watchful, the kind of eyes that saw too much and revealed too little. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, sir." Her voice was steady, professional, but there was something underneath it. Not fear exactly, but recognition. She knew who he was. She understood what she was witnessing, and she wasn't running. "You speak Italian?" A pause. Then, "Sì, parlo italiano, también español." Salvatore's eyebrows rose slightly. "And English, obviously." "It's necessary in this business, sir. Multiple languages." "Education?" Another pause, longer this time. "Some college, sir." Marco cleared his throat impatiently. "Salvatore, we don't have time for—" "I asked her a question." Salvatore's voice could have frozen hell. "What kind of college?" Sophia's chin lifted almost imperceptibly. "Pre-law, sir. University of Chicago." The room fell silent except for the rain against the windows. Salvatore studied her face, noting the intelligence there, the careful composure, the way she stood perfectly still under his scrutiny without fidgeting or looking away. "Why didn't you finish?" "Financial circumstances changed, sir." "Family?" "My grandmother required medical care." "And now?" "She passed last month, sir." Something shifted in the atmosphere of the room. Salvatore took a step closer, and Sophia didn't back away. Every other woman they'd approached that evening had either collapsed in tears or threatened to call the police. This one stood her ground. "You understand what we've been discussing?" Sophia's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly toward the stack of legal documents on the table, then back to his face. "I understand that you have a complex legal situation requiring an immediate solution, sir." Marco made a sound of disbelief. "Salvatore, you can't be serious." But Salvatore was already calculating. Pre-law education, multilingual, steady under pressure, no family complications, working night shifts at an expensive restaurant, which meant she was used to discretion and difficult clients. And most importantly, she was still standing here instead of running. "What's your full name?" "Sophia Elena Martinez, sir." "Age?" 28. "Citizenship status?" "Born in Cook County Hospital, sir. Dual citizenship, American and Spanish through my grandmother." Salvatore walked slowly around the table, never taking his eyes off her. Sophia turned to face him, but maintained her position, neither advancing nor retreating. The other men watched in fascination and horror. "Miss Martinez," Salvatore said finally, "how would you feel about getting married?" For the first time since entering the room, Sophia's composure cracked. Not with fear or shock, but with something that might have been amusement. "That would depend entirely on the terms of employment, sir." The sound that escaped Anthony's throat was somewhere between a cough and a strangled laugh. Marco looked like he was having a heart attack, but Salvatore smiled for the first time in 18 hours. "Smart answer." He gestured toward the empty chair at the table. "Sit, let's discuss terms." Sophia glanced at the clock on the wall, 4:15 a.m. Sunrise was at 6:47, 2.5 hours. I should mention, sir, that I'll need to give my employer 2 weeks' notice. This time, Salvatore's laugh was genuine, rich and dark and surprisingly warm. Miss Martinez, I think we're going to get along just fine. As Sophia moved toward the chair with the same steady grace she'd shown all evening, the rain outside began to lighten. For the first time in hours, it seemed like the sun might actually rise on a solution instead of a disaster. Salvatore pulled out her chair personally, a gesture of respect that made every other man in the room reassess the situation entirely. Because in their world, respect was the rarest currency of all. And somehow a waitress from the University of Chicago had just earned it from the most dangerous man in the city. Now, he said, retaking his seat at the head of the table, let's talk about changing your life forever. The aftermath of neutralizing Konstantin Volkov should have felt like victory. Instead, Sophia Torino discovered that eliminating one threat had revealed the true scope of the war being waged against her family. At 11:30 p.m., 6 hours after Volkov's arrest, Sophia sat in Judge Bellacourt's private chambers, along with Salvatore, Agent Rodriguez, and Assistant Federal Prosecutor Elena Vasquez. The conference table was covered with intelligence reports, financial records, and legal documents that painted a picture far more complex than a simple assassination contract. The Moretti family didn't just hire Volkov, Agent Rodriguez explained, his expression grim. They hired him as part of a coordinated campaign involving 3 other professional killers, corrupt federal officials, and what appears to be an attempt to frame your husband for crimes that would void his immunity agreement. Sophia studied the photographs spread across the table, surveillance images of men she didn't recognize, financial transfers traced through offshore accounts, and communication intercepts that made her blood run cold. They're not just trying to kill us, they're trying to destroy us legally first. Which is why, Judge Bellacourt said quietly, we need to end this permanently, tonight. Salvatore had been unusually quiet throughout the briefing, but Sophia could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands remained perfectly still on the table. She recognized the signs of a man calculating lethal mathematics. "What are you proposing?" he asked. "Complete legal annihilation," Sophia said, consulting her own notes. The Moretti family has been operating under the assumption that they can manipulate federal law enforcement through corruption and intimidation. They've made 2 critical errors. They underestimated federal resolve, and they threatened a family under federal protection while committing crimes that fall under RICO prosecution. Prosecutor Vasquez leaned forward with interest. "Explain." Sophia had spent the 6 hours since Volkov's arrest conducting the kind of legal research that had made her professors recommend her for federal clerkships. The Moretti organization meets every criterion for RICO prosecution: ongoing criminal enterprise, multiple federal crimes, interstate commerce violations, and now conspiracy to commit murder against federal witnesses. But more importantly, their recent actions provide grounds for asset forfeiture under federal terrorism statutes. She pulled out a thick legal brief she had prepared while waiting for this meeting. Hiring international assassins to target families constitutes domestic terrorism. The financial networks they've used to fund these operations can be traced and seized, and the corrupt federal officials they've compromised can be prosecuted for treason under the wartime provisions that apply to organised crime cooperation with foreign nationals. The silence that followed was profound. Even Salvatore, who had spent 25 years in organised crime, looked impressed by the scope of what Sophia had mapped out. "You're proposing to destroy them completely," Agent Rodriguez said slowly. "I'm proposing to remove them from existence using nothing but federal law and prosecutorial discretion," Sophia corrected. "No violence, no retaliation that could compromise our immunity agreement, just the systematic application of legal consequences for their criminal behaviour." Judge Bellacourt studied the brief with the intensity she usually reserved for Supreme Court precedents. This is comprehensive work, Mrs. Torino, but implementation would require coordination between multiple federal agencies and prosecutorial offices. Which is why I've already prepared the preliminary motions and contacted the relevant departments. Sophia consulted her phone, scrolling through the responses she'd received. The Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Division is interested in the money laundering aspects. The State Department wants the international terrorism angle, and the Attorney General's office sees this as an opportunity to set precedent for future organised crime prosecutions. Salvatore's expression shifted from admiration to something approaching awe. "You did all this in 6 hours?" "I did all this in 3 weeks," Sophia corrected. "From the moment Volkov was identified as a threat, I began building the legal framework to eliminate not just him, but the entire organisation that sent him." She stood and walked to the windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, noting the federal buildings that housed the various agencies that would soon be coordinating the most comprehensive organised crime prosecution in the city's history. "The Moretti family made a fundamental miscalculation," she continued. "They assumed that because I was formerly a waitress, I was legally naive. They didn't realise that I've been studying their vulnerabilities since the day I married Salvatore." "And now?" Prosecutor Vasquez asked. Sophia's smile was sharp with anticipation. "Now they discover that threatening my family was the most expensive mistake they've ever made." The next 4 hours passed in a blur of legal coordination that would have impressed the most experienced federal prosecutors. Sophia moved between phone calls, document reviews, and strategic planning with the efficiency of someone who had spent years navigating complex bureaucracies. By 3:30 a.m. the operation was in motion. Federal agents were simultaneously raiding 12 Moretti properties across 3 states. Treasury agents were freezing assets in 17 different financial institutions. Immigration enforcement was detaining 37 individuals on visa violations and deportation orders. And prosecutors in 4 different jurisdictions were filing charges that would effectively dissolve the Moretti organization's legal existence. "It's beautiful," Salvatore said quietly, watching Sophia coordinate federal law enforcement like a conductor leading an orchestra. "You're destroying them, using their own system against them." "I'm protecting our family using every legal tool available," Sophia corrected, but her satisfaction was obvious. "Antonio will never have to worry about these people again." Agent Rodriguez approached them with an update from the field teams. "Mrs. Torino, I thought you'd want to know. Vincent Moretti just requested federal protection in exchange for cooperation against the remaining members of his family." Sophia's expression was coolly satisfied. "Denied. He made his choice when he targeted my son." "Ma'am, he's offering intelligence on other organised crime families." "Agent Rodriguez." Sophia's voice carried the authority she'd developed over weeks of being taken seriously by federal officials. "Vincent Moretti hired an assassin to murder a 6-year-old child. There is no cooperation agreement, plea bargain, or federal protection that makes that acceptable. He will face the full legal consequences of his choices." The agent nodded respectfully and returned to his communications. Around them, the machinery of federal justice continued its methodical work of dismantling everything the Moretti family had built over 3 generations. "There's one more thing," Judge Bellecourt said as dawn began to lighten the windows. "The intelligence we've gathered during this operation has revealed compromised federal officials in 3 other jurisdictions. Your legal analysis has provided grounds for internal investigations that could reform how witness protection operates nationally." Sophia felt a surge of pride mixed with exhaustion. Good. If our experience helps protect other families, then everything we've been through serves a larger purpose. Salvatore moved to stand beside her at the windows, his presence warm and steadying. "How do you feel about becoming the most feared legal mind in Chicago organised crime circles?" Sophia leaned against him, allowing herself to accept comfort for the first time in 18 hours. I feel like I've finally found work that uses all my capabilities. And personally, she turned to face him, noting the exhaustion and pride and something deeper in his dark eyes. I feel like we've proven that our partnership can survive anything. Salvatore's hands framed her face with the gentleness she had come to treasure. Sophia, what you did today, the planning, the execution, the sheer audacity of taking on an entire criminal organization using nothing but legal expertise, I've never seen anything like it. You're impressed by good strategy. I'm impressed by you. His voice carried conviction that made her breath catch. I'm in love with you. The words hung between them in the grey pre-dawn light, carrying more weight than any legal document or federal protection agreement. Sophia felt something in her chest open and expand, a warmth that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction, and everything to do with recognition that their strategic partnership had become something infinitely more precious. I love you too, she said quietly, and meant it with every fibre of her being. When he kissed her this time, it was with the passion of a man who had watched his wife wage war on his enemies using nothing but intelligence and determination. It was the kiss of someone who understood that he had found not just a partner in business, but a partner in life who would stand beside him against any threat. They broke apart as the sun cleared the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that matched the warmth spreading through Sophia's chest. What happens now? Salvatore asked. Sophia smiled, feeling the satisfaction of someone who had not only survived, but triumphed. Now we go home to our son and explain that the bad men who wanted to hurt our family will never bother us again. And then? Then we build the empire we planned together, legally, legitimately, and with the kind of federal connections that make us untouchable. Sophia's expression was serene with confidence. The Torino family just became the most protected and most feared legal entity in Chicago. As they left the courthouse hand in hand, the morning light caught Sophia's wedding ring, sending sparkles across the marble walls. Behind them, the machinery of federal justice continued its work, systematically destroying everyone who had dared to threaten the family of Sophia Torino. The invisible waitress was not just gone. She had been replaced by a woman who could bring down criminal empires with a legal brief and a phone call to the right federal prosecutor. And anyone who threatened her family would discover exactly how dangerous that transformation had made her. 6 months after Sophia Martinez had walked into Romano's as an invisible waitress, she returned as Sophia Torino, federal legal consultant and the most influential woman in Chicago's transformation, from criminal empire to legitimate powerhouse. The restaurant looked exactly the same. Mahogany tables, crystal chandeliers, the kind of understated elegance that attracted politicians and power brokers. But everything else had changed completely. Where once she had served coffee with trembling hands and careful invisibility, Sophia now sat at the head table in a tailored Armani suit, reviewing contracts that would legitimize the final 20% of Torino business operations. Mrs. Torino approached Maria Santos, the restaurant's new manager and Sophia's former co-worker. Your usual table is ready. Sophia looked up from her legal documents, smiling at the woman who had once worked beside her during those exhausting night shifts. Maria, please, just Sophia when we're speaking personally. How are your immigration hearings progressing? Thanks to the legal clinic you established perfectly, my family's green card applications were approved last week. Maria's gratitude was genuine and profound. I never imagined that serving coffee together would lead to you becoming the person who could change our lives. It was a conversation that happened frequently now. Sophia had used her federal connections and legal expertise to establish immigration assistance programs, legitimate business opportunities, and educational scholarships for families in her old neighborhood. The invisible waitress hadn't just transformed herself, she had transformed everyone around her. Mama Sophia, Antonio's voice carried across the restaurant as he burst through the private dining room doors. his school uniform slightly rumpled from an afternoon of playground adventures. At 6.5, he had grown 3 inches and gained the kind of confidence that came from having 2 parents who adored him completely. "Carino, what have I told you about running in restaurants?" Sophia asked, but her smile undermined any attempt at discipline. "That it's undignified for the son of important people," Antonio recited dutifully. Then his formal composure cracked completely. "But Mamma, wait until you see what I made in art class." From his backpack he produced a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures standing in front of a house with exaggerated hearts floating above their heads. The figures were labelled Papa, Mama Sophia, and me in careful 6-year-old handwriting. "It's our family," Antonio explained proudly. "Mrs. Patterson says I should enter it in the school art contest because it shows emotional development and family attachment." Sophia felt the familiar tightness in her chest that occurred whenever Antonio demonstrated just how completely he had healed from his early trauma. The selective mutism was gone, replaced by the chattiness of a secure child. The nightmares had stopped 3 months ago, and the careful distance he had maintained from maternal figures had transformed into the easy affection he showed Sophia daily. "It's the most beautiful artwork I've ever seen," Sophia said seriously, accepting the drawing like the treasure it was. "We'll frame it for the office immediately." "Really? Next to Papa's business awards?" "Right in the centre, where everyone can see it." Antonio beamed with pride and launched into a detailed explanation of his day, his voice carrying the kind of happy chatter that made Sophia's heart expand every time she heard it. In 6 months they had become a family in every sense that mattered. Salvatore appeared in the doorway of the private dining room, his expression shifting from business focus to warm affection as he took in the scene of his wife and son examining artwork together. The transformation in him was as profound as Sophia's own. Where once he had carried the weight of leadership alone, he now shared decisions with a partner he trusted completely. "How did the federal consultation go?" Sophia asked as he joined them at the table. "Agent Rodriguez confirms that our cooperation has resulted in the dissolution of 4 other organised crime families and the arrest of 37 corrupt federal officials." Salvatore's voice carried satisfaction mixed with relief. "The Justice Department is officially classifying the Torino organisation as a reformed entity cooperating with federal law enforcement. All immunity agreements are permanent." Sophia nodded with professional satisfaction. "And the legitimate business expansion?" "The construction contracts for the new federal building were approved, the shipping company's international permits were fast-tracked, and the Waste Management Division just secured the contract for the entire downtown district." Salvatore's smile was warm with pride. "Your legal restructuring has made us more profitable than we ever were as a criminal organisation." "More importantly," Sophia said, reviewing the quarterly reports, "we're completely legitimate. Antonio will inherit businesses he can be proud of publicly." The mention of his future made Antonio look up from his drawing with interest. "Papa, when I grow up, will I work in the family business like you?" "Only if you want to, Figlio. You can be anything you choose. Doctor, lawyer, artist, teacher. The family business will be there if you want it, but you'll have every option available." "What if I want to be like Mama Sophia and work with the government to help people?" Sophia's throat tightened with emotion. "Then we'll make sure you get the best education possible and support you completely." Antonio considered this seriously. "Could I be both, family business and government work?" "Absolutely," Salvatore said, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who had watched Sophia prove exactly that combination possible. "Your mama has shown us that serving your family and serving justice aren't contradictory goals." As if summoned by their conversation, Agent Rodriguez appeared in the restaurant's entrance, his presence no longer a source of tension, but of collegial respect. Over 6 months the federal agent had become something approaching a family friend. "Mrs. Torino," he approached their table with professional courtesy, "I have the final documentation for your federal consulting contract." Sophia accepted the folder, reviewing terms that would formalize her role as a legal consultant to multiple federal agencies. The compensation was substantial, the authority was unprecedented, and the security clearance would make her one of the most connected legal minds in federal law enforcement. "Congratulations," Agent Rodriguez continued. "You're officially the first former organized crime family member to receive permanent federal consulting status. The precedent you've set will reshape how witness protection and family reformation programs operate nationally." "It's been a privilege to work with such dedicated public servants," Sophia replied diplomatically, but her satisfaction was obvious. After Agent Rodriguez departed, the Torino family settled into their dinner with the easy comfort of people who had found their place in the world. Antonio chatted about school friends and art projects. Salvatore discussed business developments and political connections. Sophia reviewed legal briefs and federal consultation requests. But beneath the professional accomplishments and domestic happiness, Sophia was aware of a deeper transformation. She no longer woke up afraid of discovery, deportation, or economic disaster. She no longer felt invisible or powerless or dependent on circumstances beyond her control. "Sophia," Salvatore said quietly as Antonio coloured at the far end of the table, "do you ever miss the simplicity of your old life?" Sophia considered the question seriously. "I missed the certainty. When I was serving coffee and studying law, I knew exactly what each day would bring, but I don't miss feeling powerless to change anything important. And now I wake up knowing that I can protect my family, help my community, and use my skills to make meaningful change." Sophia's voice carried quiet confidence. "I've become who I was always meant to be." Salvatore reached across the table to cover her hand with his own. "I never expected, when I was desperate enough to propose to a waitress I barely knew, that I would end up with a partner who would transform everything I thought I knew about power, family, and what's possible when two people choose to build something together." "And I never expected," Sophia replied, "that agreeing to help a dangerous stranger would lead to the most fulfilling life I could imagine." Their conversation was interrupted by Antonio's announcement that he had finished his homework and was ready for family reading time, a tradition they had established where all three of them reviewed the day's events and planned for tomorrow's opportunities. As they gathered their belongings to head home to the mansion that had truly become home, Sophia caught her reflection in Romano's mirrored walls. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the exhausted waitress who had served coffee here 6 months ago. This woman radiated confidence, authority, and the kind of calm that came from knowing she could handle whatever challenges arose. "Ready to go home?" Salvatore asked, offering his arm with the gallantry that had become natural between them. "Ready," Sophia replied, accepting Antonio's hand on her other side. As they left Romano's together, Sophia realized that the most profound transformation hadn't been her circumstances, or her bank account, or even her legal status. The most profound transformation had been her understanding of what family could be when it was built on choice rather than obligation, respect rather than fear, and partnership rather than possession. The invisible waitress was gone forever, replaced by a woman who had discovered that true power came not from hiding from the world, but from engaging with it completely, as a wife, a mother, a legal advocate, and a force for change that no one would ever overlook again. 1 year after Sophia Martinez had accepted a desperate proposal from a dangerous stranger, she stood in the same private dining room at Romano's, but everything about the moment proclaimed that miracles were not only possible, they were profitable, legal, and surprisingly beautiful. The anniversary celebration was intimate by design. Judge Bellacour sat beside Agent Rodriguez, their professional relationship having evolved into genuine friendship over months of successful federal cooperation. Elena Vasquez, now Sophia's law partner in the firm they had established together, laughed with Marco about the latest prosecution victories. and at the head of the table, Sophia and Salvatore watched their extended family with the satisfaction of people who had built something extraordinary from desperate circumstances. "Mamma Sophia," Antonio announced from his position beside her, his voice carrying the confidence of a 7-year-old who had never doubted his place in the world. "I have something important to tell everyone." The room quieted with the respectful attention adults gave to children who had learned they were valued for their thoughts as well as their presence. Antonio stood with the formality he had inherited from his father, but his excitement was purely his own. "Today at school, Mrs. Patterson asked us to write about our heroes. I wrote about Mamma Sophia because she shows that you can be smart and strong and help people all at the same time." He pulled a carefully folded paper from his pocket. "I want to read it to everyone." Sophia felt her throat tighten with emotion as Antonio began reading in the clear voice of someone who had learned that his words mattered. "My hero is my mama, Sophia Torino. She used to be a waitress, but now she's a lawyer who helps families stay together. She married my papa to keep our family safe, but then she made our family happy. She teaches me that being smart is more important than being strong, and that helping people is the most important job anyone can have. When I grow up, I want to help families like Mamma Sophia does." The applause that followed was warm and genuine, but Sophia was more focused on the way Salvatore's hand found hers under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Thank you, Carino," Sophia said when the clapping subsided. "That's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever written about me." "It's also completely accurate," Judge Bellicourt added with judicial authority. "Sophia, your work over the past year has reformed how federal law enforcement approaches organised crime rehabilitation. You've created precedents that will protect families for generations." "And," Agent Rodriguez continued with professional pride, "your consultation has resulted in the peaceful reformation of 6 criminal organizations and the prevention of approximately 47 violent crimes. The federal government considers you an invaluable asset." Sophia accepted the praise with the grace she had developed over months of being recognized for her contributions, but her attention was drawn to the discreet presence of her security detail, federal agents who protected her not because she was vulnerable, but because she was valuable. "There's one more announcement," Salvatore said, standing with the kind of formal dignity that had made him legendary in business circles. "Sophia's law firm has been selected to handle the legal transition of the Benedetti family in New York, the Castellano organization in Detroit, and 3 smaller families in Philadelphia. She's officially the most sought-after legal consultant for organized crime reformation in the country." Elena raised her glass with professional pride. "To Sophia Torino, who proved that the most powerful weapon against criminal organizations is someone who understands both sides of the law and chooses justice." As they toasted her success, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The terrified waitress who had accepted a desperate proposal no longer existed. In her place was a woman who commanded respect in federal courtrooms, boardrooms, and the kind of family dinners where former enemies became allies through shared commitment to legitimate success. "Sophia," Marco said quietly, approaching her with the deference he had learned to show the woman who had saved their organization through pure intelligence. "I owe you an apology I never properly gave." "Marco, that's not necessary." "It is." His voice carried the weight of someone acknowledging a profound mistake. "When Salvatore first proposed this arrangement, I thought you were a liability. I couldn't see past your background to recognize your capabilities. I was wrong, and my short-sightedness could have cost us everything." Sophia's smile was warm but firm. "Marco, you were protecting your family the best way you knew how. That's not something that requires apology." "What requires apology," he continued, "is that I failed to recognize that you weren't joining our family. You were transforming it into something better than any of us imagined possible." After dinner, as their guests departed with promises to meet again soon for various legal consultations and family celebrations, Sophia found herself alone with Salvatore in the same room where they had first negotiated their arrangement. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing the question he had posed on their wedding morning. Sophia moved to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline, where federal buildings housed agencies that now sought her expertise, where legitimate businesses bore the Torino name with pride, and where families like hers could thrive without fear of violence or persecution. "I regret that it took desperation to bring us together," she said thoughtfully. "I regret that Antonio had to experience trauma before finding healing. I regret that we couldn't achieve this transformation without putting people we love at risk. But—" Sophia turned to face her husband, noting the silver threading through his hair that gave him distinguished gravity, the lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter shared with family, and the expression of complete contentment that had replaced the calculating wariness she remembered from their first meeting. "But I don't regret a single choice we made once we found each other." Sophia moved closer, allowing herself to sink into the warmth and safety of his embrace. "I don't regret marrying a dangerous stranger. I don't regret risking everything for a chance at something better. And I don't regret discovering that love built on respect and partnership is infinitely stronger than anything built on desperation or convenience." Salvatore's arms tightened around her with the possessive tenderness that had become his signature gesture. "Mrs. Torino, you have exceeded every expectation I didn't know I was allowed to have." "Mr. Torino, you have given me a life I never dared to imagine." When he kissed her, it was with the passion of someone who had spent a year discovering that his strategic marriage had become the love story of his lifetime. It was the kiss of partners who had built an empire together, parents who had raised a child together, and lovers who had chosen each other every day for 365 days. They broke apart as Antonio's voice carried down the hallway. He was talking to his stuffed lion about the day's excitement, processing his happiness with the kind of secure chatter that confirmed his complete emotional recovery. "What happens next?" Salvatore asked. Sophia smiled, feeling the quiet confidence that had replaced the desperate hope she had carried into their first negotiation. "Next, we continue building the life we've created together. We expand the law firm, help more families transition to legitimate lives, and raise our son to understand that real power comes from using your abilities to protect the people you love. And personally," Sophia said, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who had found her place in the world completely, "we love each other, raise our family, and prove every day that the best partnerships are built on choice, respect, and the absolute determination to create something better than either person could achieve alone." As they walked home through streets that were now safe for their family, past businesses that bore their name with legitimate pride, Sophia realized that the most profound transformation hadn't been her circumstances or status. The most profound transformation had been her understanding that true strength came not from surviving adversity, but from using that survival to build something beautiful for the people who mattered most. The invisible waitress was gone forever, replaced by a woman who had learned that being seen, valued, and loved was not just possible. It was the foundation for changing the world, one family at a time. Behind them, Romano's glowed with warm light, ready to serve the next generation of power brokers and deal makers. But the most important negotiation in the restaurant's history had already been concluded, resulting in a partnership that had transformed not just two lives, but an entire understanding of what family could be when it was built on the revolutionary foundation of mutual choice and respect. The waitress was gone. Long live the Queen. Sophia Martinez had learned to make herself invisible long before she understood why it was necessary. Growing up in Pilsen with an undocumented grandmother and a mother who cleaned houses for families that pretended not to see her, invisibility was survival. But as she sat across from the most dangerous man in Chicago, she realized that 28 years of practiced anonymity had been preparing her for this exact moment. The leather chair was more expensive than her rent. The mahogany table felt solid enough to stop bullets. and the men staring at her with barely concealed shock were the kind who made people disappear for asking the wrong questions. Yet Sophia's hands remained steady as she folded them in her lap, exactly as her grandmother had taught her during those long afternoons in immigration court. Senora Martinez always said you must never let them see you shake, mija. The moment they see fear, they own you. Before we begin, Sophia said, her voice carrying the quiet authority she'd developed handling drunk millionaires and entitled politicians at Romano's, I should clarify something. I heard every word of your conversation from the moment I entered this room. Marco's face went white. Jesus Christ, Salvatore. Relax. Salvatore's eyes never left Sophia's face. What did you hear? The Moretti family has turned federal witness. Judge Catherine Bellecourt will provide legal immunity and protection for your organization, but only through a marriage alliance with her daughter Rebecca, who has fled to Geneva. The ceremony must occur before sunrise in... Sophia glanced at the antique clock on the wall. 2 hours and 27 minutes, or the offer expires and federal prosecution proceeds. The silence was suffocating. Anthony gripped his espresso cup so tightly his knuckles went white, but Salvatore leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And what else? Sophia's internal law school training kicked in automatically. You need someone who can withstand federal scrutiny, handle high-pressure social situations, and maintain operational security. The bride must be of suitable character, according to Judge Bellecourt's specifications, which I assume means clean background, no criminal associations, and sufficient education to interact with legitimate political figures. Cristo Santo, whispered Anthony. She was taking notes. Not notes, Sophia corrected. I have what you might call a professional interest in legal proceedings. When you've spent 3 years serving lawyers, judges, and politicians, you learn to follow complex negotiations. Salvatore studied her with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. But Sophia had spent years being evaluated by men who thought they owned the world. Federal judges scrutinizing her grandmother's asylum case. Professors deciding whether a scholarship girl belonged in their classroom. Restaurant managers calculating whether her tips were worth the trouble of employing someone who looked like her. She was used to being underestimated. She was not used to being seen. Tell me about this professional interest, Salvatore said. I was 18 months away from my JD when my grandmother's medical bills required my immediate attention. Dementia care facilities don't offer payment plans. Sophia's voice remained steady, but something flickered in her eyes. I intended to return to complete my degree once her affairs were settled. And now? Now I work 60-hour weeks to pay for a studio apartment and send money to my cousin in Phoenix who's raising her 3 children alone because her husband was deported. Sophia met his gaze directly. I understand complex legal situations because I live in one. Marco leaned forward aggressively. Salvatore, this is insane. We don't know anything about her family, her background, Her family consists of a deceased grandmother, a cousin in Arizona, and approximately 47 distant relatives in Salamanca, whom she hasn't seen since childhood, Sophia said calmly. My background includes Dean's List honours in constitutional law, volunteer work with the Immigration Legal Aid Society, and 3 years of serving federal judges who discuss classified cases over dinner because they assume the help doesn't speak English. You memorised judges' conversations? Anthony asked, horrified. I memorised everything. Sophia turned to face him. In my world, Mr. Rossi, information is the only currency that matters. When Judge Henderson discusses sentencing guidelines for RICO cases over his anniversary dinner, when Prosecutor Williams complains about witness protection failures during his birthday party, when Immigration Judge Chen explains asylum hearing procedures to his wife during their engagement celebration. I listen, because someday that information might help someone like my grandmother. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Every man at the table suddenly understood that they were not dealing with a desperate waitress looking for easy money. They were dealing with someone who had spent 3 years accidentally conducting intelligence operations on the federal justice system. Salvatore's voice was silk over steel. "What do you know about my organization?" "I know that Romano's private dining room hosts the Torino family business meetings every Tuesday at 3 a.m. I know that your legitimate businesses include 3 construction companies, 2 shipping firms, and a waste management operation that recently secured city contracts worth $12 million. I know that your son Antonio is 6 years old, hasn't spoken publicly since his mother's funeral 18 months ago, and sees Dr. Elizabeth Murphy for trauma therapy every Thursday afternoon." The silence that followed could have been measured in geological ages. "I know," Sophia continued, her voice softening slightly, "that you carry his picture in your jacket pocket and check it every time someone mentions children. I know that you've turned down 3 multi-million-dollar business opportunities because they would have required travel during his school breaks. And I know that finding him a stable maternal figure is more important to you than any business alliance." Marco's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket. Salvatore raised one finger and the gesture stopped mid-motion. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I watch people, Mr. Torino. It's how I stayed alive in my neighborhood, and it's how I've stayed employed in yours." Sophia's voice carried a hint of something that might have been compassion. "You're not just looking for a wife to satisfy Judge Bellecourt's requirements. You're looking for someone who won't traumatize your son any further." For the first time since the conversation began, Salvatore's carefully maintained composure cracked, not with anger or suspicion, but with something that looked almost like relief. "The other candidates," he said quietly. "The mayor's daughter had a panic attack because she couldn't handle the pressure. The senator's niece called her lawyers because she saw you as a threat to her political family. Roberto's sister tried to call the FBI because she thought you were planning to hurt her." Sophia leaned forward slightly. "None of them saw what I see." "Which is?" "A father who's trying to save his family." The words hung in the air like a prayer. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely, and the first hint of dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. "You understand," Salvatore said carefully, "that marrying me would place you in considerable danger. My enemies would consider you a target. The federal government would scrutinize every aspect of your life. And my world requires a specific kind of discretion that most people find challenging." Sophia's smile was small but genuine. "Mr. Torino, I've spent 3 years serving dinner to people who could destroy my family with a phone call. I've watched federal prosecutors plan cases that could separate children from their parents. I've listened to immigration judges discuss deportations that would send grandmothers back to countries where they'll die of treatable diseases." She stood slowly, smoothing down her uniform skirt with hands that had never been steadier. "I understand dangerous men. I understand complex legal situations. And I understand what it means to protect the people you love, regardless of the cost." Sophia met his eyes with unwavering directness. "The question isn't whether I can handle your world, Mr. Torino. The question is whether your world is ready for someone who's been preparing for it her entire life." Salvatore rose from his chair with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to commanding rooms full of killers. But when he looked at Sophia, there was something in his expression that his men had rarely seen: respect. "Miss Martinez," he said formally, "would you be willing to discuss the specific terms of a marriage arrangement designed to satisfy Judge Bellecourt's requirements while protecting both our interests?" Sophia glanced at the clock. Dawn was 43 minutes away. "I think we can reach an acceptable agreement, Mr. Torino, but I should warn you, I don't negotiate from a position of desperation. I negotiate from a position of mutual benefit." Anthony made a sound somewhere between admiration and terror. Marco looked like he was witnessing the end of the world, but Salvatore's smile was sharp with anticipation. "In that case," he said, "let's discuss what you want in exchange for saving my life." As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the rain-washed windows of Romano's, Sophia Martinez stopped being invisible forever. And somewhere in the distance, church bells began to chime the hour that would change everything. The next 37 minutes would either save Salvatore Torino's empire or destroy it entirely. As dawn crept across Chicago's skyline, casting long shadows through Romano's private dining room, the most powerful man in the city found himself negotiating with a woman who had spent the last 3 years refilling his coffee cup. Sophia had asked for 5 minutes to prepare her position. She disappeared into the restaurant's office and emerged with a leather portfolio that looked suspiciously organised for someone who claimed to be unprepared. Salvatore made a mental note to investigate exactly how much preparation Miss Martinez had been doing. "Before we begin," Sophia said, settling back into her chair with the composure of someone entering a boardroom rather than a potential death sentence, "I need to understand Judge Bellecourt's specific requirements." Marco consulted his notes with trembling fingers. Marriage to a woman of suitable character and education, public ceremony before sunrise, convincing relationship documentation, and... He swallowed hard. The judge wants to meet the bride personally before the ceremony. Timeline. Salvatore checked his Rolex. 36 minutes to convince her, another hour for ceremony preparations if she approves. Sophia opened her portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of paper covered in neat handwriting. "Then we should move quickly. I've drafted preliminary terms." The silence in the room was profound. Anthony's espresso cup hung suspended halfway to his mouth. Marco's pen slipped from his fingers. Even Salvatore, who had negotiated with federal prosecutors and foreign governments, looked stunned. "You drafted terms?" he asked slowly. "While you were discussing Judge Bellecourt's requirements, I was calculating the legal implications of a strategic marriage arrangement." Sophia's voice carried the calm authority of someone who had spent years navigating bureaucratic nightmares. "This isn't my first complex negotiation, Mr. Torino. It's simply my most consequential." She slid the paper across the table. Salvatore's dark eyes scanned the document, his expression shifting from surprise to intrigue to something that might have been admiration. "Duration of arrangement, minimum 2 years with option for renewal or dissolution by mutual consent," he read aloud. "Financial compensation, completion of law degree, full tuition and living expenses, medical care for any dependents, legal protection under family name." "Standard terms for any partnership agreement," Sophia said calmly. "Living arrangements, separate bedrooms until mutual consent for alternative arrangements." Salvatore's eyebrow arched. "Physical intimacy, strictly voluntary for both parties." "I'm not naive about what this marriage would require for public appearances, Mr. Torino, but I won't be coerced into anything beyond the minimum necessary to maintain credibility." Marco leaned forward aggressively. "You're asking for a business partnership, not a marriage." Sophia turned to face him with the kind of steady gaze that had silenced drunken politicians and entitled judges. "I'm asking for terms that protect both parties' interests while fulfilling Judge Bellecourt's requirements, unless you'd prefer to explain to the federal prosecutors why your organization couldn't secure a single willing bride in all of Chicago." "Enough." Salvatore's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He continued reading, his expression growing more thoughtful with each line. "Professional development, completion of JD with specialization in corporate law, integration into legitimate business operations, authority to review all contracts and legal documentation." "I assume your current legal counsel has missed certain opportunities for legitimization," Sophia said. "My research suggests your organization operates at approximately 40% legal capacity. With proper structuring, that could increase to 80% within 2 years. The room fell silent except for the soft tick of the antique clock. Outside, the sky was lightening rapidly, and the distant sound of early morning traffic drifted through the windows. "Your research?" Salvatore's voice was silk over steel. Sophia met his gaze without flinching. "I've been serving dinner to federal judges for 3 years, Mr. Torino. When Judge Martinez discusses RICO case precedents with his colleagues, when Prosecutor Williams explains plea bargain strategies to his wife, when Corporate Attorney Chen reviews merger loopholes with her husband. I listen, because information about legal vulnerabilities might someday help someone I care about. And now you're offering to help me. I'm offering to create a mutually beneficial arrangement that serves both our long-term interests. Sophia gestured toward the document. You need a bride who can satisfy Judge Bellecourt's requirements and won't collapse under federal scrutiny. I need financial security, educational opportunity, and legal protection for my family. Anthony found his voice. What about the kid, Antonio? For the first time since entering the room, Sophia's professional composure softened slightly. I've seen your son here, Mr. Torino, Tuesday evenings when you bring him for dinner before these meetings. He sits in the corner booth with his colouring books and watches everything with eyes that are too old for his age. Salvatore's jaw tightened. He's been through enough trauma. Which is why any arrangement would include provisions for his well-being, gradual introduction, child psychology consultation, and absolute veto power on my part if he shows signs of distress. Sophia's voice carried genuine warmth. I'm not interested in traumatizing a child who's already lost his mother. I'm interested in providing stability. You've thought about this. I've been watching your family for 3 years, Mr. Torino. I know that Antonio responds to quiet voices and gentle movements. I know he's afraid of loud men, but trusts women who speak Spanish. I know he draws pictures of his mother and hides them so you won't be sad. Sophia paused, her expression gentle but determined. I know that finding him a maternal figure who won't abandon him is more important to you than any business deal. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Salvatore studied Sophia's face, looking for manipulation, calculation, or deceit. Instead, he found something that looked suspiciously like genuine concern. There's something else, Sophia continued, consulting her notes. Judge Bellecourt's daughter Rebecca. She fled because she was terrified of an arranged marriage to a stranger. But she might be willing to provide character testimony if she understands that this arrangement protects both parties. Marco looked confused. How could that possibly help? Because Judge Bellecourt isn't just protecting her political reputation, Sophia explained patiently. She's protecting her daughter from a marriage she didn't choose. If Rebecca publicly supports our arrangement as a modern partnership between equals, it legitimizes the judge's position and provides cover for future political decisions. Salvatore leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from surprise to calculation to something that might have been respect. You're proposing to solve multiple problems simultaneously. I'm proposing to create a sustainable solution rather than a temporary fix. Sophia met his gaze steadily. Arranged marriages fail because they're based on coercion rather than mutual benefit. This arrangement succeeds because both parties gain something they actually want. And what do you want, Miss Martinez? Sophia's smile was small but genuine. I want to finish my law degree. I want financial security for my family. I want to use my skills in an environment where they're valued rather than overlooked. She paused, her expression growing more serious. And I want to help a little boy who reminds me of my cousin's children, intelligent, traumatized, and desperately in need of stability. The clock chimed 5:30 a.m. Sunrise was 17 minutes away. Salvatore stood and walked to the window, looking out at the lightening sky. When he turned back to the table, his expression was unreadable. There's one more thing you should understand, Miss Martinez. Marrying me doesn't just provide financial security. It also places you in mortal danger. My enemies would consider you a legitimate target. The federal government would scrutinize every aspect of your life. And my world requires a kind of discretion that most people find impossible to maintain. Sophia rose from her chair with fluid grace. Mr. Torino, I've survived 3 years in a neighbourhood where speaking the wrong language could get you deported. I've navigated federal immigration court while maintaining a full course load and a part-time job. I've served dinner to judges who could destroy my family with a single phone call, and I've never once betrayed a confidence or revealed information that could hurt anyone I care about." She stepped closer, her dark eyes never leaving his face. "I understand dangerous men. I understand complex legal situations, and I understand what it means to protect the people you love, regardless of personal cost." Salvatore studied her for a long moment, noting the steady hands, the unwavering gaze, the quiet strength that had somehow escaped his attention for 3 years. "Miss Martinez," he said finally, "I believe we have an agreement." Sophia extended her hand with the formality of a business contract. "Then I suggest we call Judge Bellecourt immediately. We have 16 minutes to convince her, and I'd prefer to have time for proper wedding preparations." As Salvatore shook her hand, feeling the calluses from 3 years of hard work and the strength of someone who had never been given anything she didn't earn, he realized that somewhere in the last hour the desperate search for a bride had become something else entirely. It had become the discovery of a partner. Outside, the sun cleared the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. And in Romano's private dining room, the most dangerous man in Chicago found himself looking forward to his wedding day. Judge Catherine Bellecourt had presided over federal court for 18 years, sentenced murderers to life imprisonment, and faced down cartel lawyers without blinking. But at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in November, she found herself genuinely surprised for the first time in a decade. The woman sitting across from her in Romano's private dining room was not what she had expected from Salvatore Torino's emergency bride. "Miss Martinez," Judge Bellecourt said, her voice carrying the authority that had silenced countless courtrooms. "When Mr. Torino called 13 minutes ago requesting an immediate meeting, I assumed I would be interviewing another terrified socialite or desperate immigrant looking for citizenship papers." Sophia met the judge's penetrating gaze without flinching. "I understand your skepticism, Your Honour. This arrangement is unconventional by any standard." "Unconventional is generous. Most people would call it insane." Judge Bellecourt consulted the legal documents Sophia had prepared, her expression growing more intrigued with each page. "You've drafted a comprehensive prenuptial agreement, including provisions for educational advancement, professional development, and child welfare considerations. This reads like a corporate partnership contract." "Because that's essentially what it is, Your Honour. A strategic partnership designed to serve mutual long-term interests while satisfying your requirements for the immunity arrangement." Salvatore sat beside Sophia, noting how she commanded the room despite being the youngest person present. Her transformation from invisible waitress to legal negotiator was so complete he found himself wondering how many other talents she'd been hiding behind that professional mask. Judge Bellecourt set down the documents and studied Sophia with the intensity she usually reserved for suspected perjurers. "Explain to me, Miss Martinez, why an educated woman with no criminal background would voluntarily enter into marriage with one of Chicago's most dangerous men." "Because Mr. Torino isn't just one of Chicago's most dangerous men, Your Honour. He's also one of Chicago's most successful businessmen, with legitimate enterprises worth over $40 million and a 6-year-old son who needs stability." Sophia's voice carried the calm authority she'd developed, testifying in immigration court. "This arrangement provides him with the political alliance he requires, while giving me opportunities for advancement that wouldn't otherwise be available. And you're not concerned about the inherent dangers of his other business interests." Sophia's smile was small but genuine. "Your Honour, I've spent 3 years working night shifts in a neighbourhood where speaking Spanish too loudly could result in ICE raids. I've navigated federal immigration hearings while supporting a grandmother with dementia and maintaining academic excellence. I've served dinner to federal prosecutors who discuss witness protection failures like they're discussing the weather." She leaned forward slightly, her expression growing more serious. "I understand dangerous situations because I've lived in them my entire life. The difference is that Mr. Torino's world offers legal protection and financial security that my previous circumstances never provided. Judge Bellecourt's eyebrows rose. You're saying you prefer the devil you can negotiate with to the devil you can't? I'm saying I prefer a partnership with defined terms and mutual benefits to a life of economic vulnerability with no legal recourse. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft tick of the antique clock and the distant sound of early morning traffic. Judge Bellecourt turned to Salvatore, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet during the entire exchange. Mr. Torino, your previous approach to marriage arrangements has been traditional. What makes this situation different? Salvatore's voice was measured, careful. Miss Martinez brings unique qualifications to this arrangement, Your Honour. Her legal education, her discretion, and her understanding of complex political situations make her an ideal partner for navigating the challenges ahead. And personally? For the first time since the conversation began, Salvatore hesitated. His dark eyes flickered towards Sophia, who maintained her professional composure despite the weight of his gaze. My son has been selectively mute since his mother's death 18 months ago. Last Tuesday, Miss Martinez spent 15 minutes speaking with him in gentle Italian while he hid under a restaurant table during a particularly intense business discussion. He responded to her. He hasn't responded to anyone else in that time. Judge Bellecourt's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I see. Miss Martinez understands that this arrangement isn't just about political alliances or business partnerships. It's about providing stability for a traumatized child. Salvatore's voice carried a vulnerability that his associates rarely heard. She's the first person who's seen Antonio as more than a complication to be managed. Sophia spoke quietly. Your Honour, I've worked with immigrant families for 3 years. I understand what trauma does to children, and I understand how to rebuild trust slowly and carefully. Antonio needs consistency, patience, and respect for his emotional boundaries. This arrangement provides all 3. Judge Bellecourt stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sunrise painting Chicago's skyline in shades of gold and rose. When she turned back to the table, her expression was thoughtful. Miss Martinez, I need to ask you directly. Are you entering this marriage under any form of coercion, threat, or duress? No, Your Honour. I'm entering this marriage because it serves my long-term interests better than any alternative currently available to me. And Mr. Torino, you understand that this arrangement places Miss Martinez under federal protection as a family member of a cooperating witness? I understand completely, Your Honour. Her safety is my primary concern. Judge Bellecourt returned to her seat, her decision clearly forming. There's one more requirement. My daughter Rebecca has expressed concern about legitimizing arranged marriages, even strategic ones. She's agreed to provide character testimony if she's convinced that this arrangement is genuinely consensual and mutually beneficial. Sophia consulted her watch. What would convince her, Your Honour? A conversation. She's currently on video call from Geneva, waiting to speak with you both. Salvatore and Sophia exchanged glances. They had prepared for legal scrutiny, media questions, and political complications. They had not prepared for a psychological evaluation from a terrified judge's daughter. I should warn you, Judge Bellecourt continued, Rebecca fled to Switzerland specifically to avoid an arranged marriage. She considers the entire concept fundamentally exploitative. If she's not convinced that you're entering this freely and intelligently, I withdraw my support entirely. The laptop on the table chimed softly, and Judge Bellecourt opened the video call. A young woman with intelligent eyes and expensive jewellery appeared on screen, her expression sceptical but curious. Rebecca, Judge Bellecourt said, I'd like you to meet Sophia Martinez and Salvatore Torino. Rebecca's gaze fixed immediately on Sophia. Miss Martinez, my mother tells me you're planning to marry a stranger for political reasons. As someone who just fled the country to avoid the same situation, I'm curious about your reasoning. Sophia's response was immediate and direct. Because you were being coerced into a marriage you didn't choose, Miss Bellecourt. I'm choosing a partnership that serves my interests and values. Explain the difference. You are expected to sacrifice your autonomy for your family's political advantage. I'm leveraging my skills and education to secure opportunities that wouldn't otherwise be available to someone from my background. Sophia's voice carried quiet confidence. Your mother was asking you to give up your agency. Mr. Torino is offering to enhance mine. Rebecca leaned forward on screen. And you're not afraid of him? Sophia glanced at Salvatore, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands remained perfectly still on the table. Miss Bellecourt, I've been serving dinner to powerful men for 3 years. I've seen federal prosecutors threaten families, immigration judges separate children from parents, and corporate lawyers destroy people's lives with paperwork. Fear isn't the right word. What is the right word? Respect. Mr. Torino is dangerous, but his danger is directed outward, toward people who threaten his family. I'm not planning to threaten his family. I'm planning to join it. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, studying Sophia's face through the video connection. What about love? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sophia's composure never wavered, but something shifted in her expression, becoming softer, more honest. Miss Bellecourt, I've seen what passes for love in my neighbourhood. Domestic violence justified as passion. Economic dependence disguised as romance. Men who claim to love women but refuse to let them work or learn or grow. Sophia's voice carried quiet conviction. This arrangement offers something more valuable than romantic love. It offers partnership, respect, and mutual benefit. If genuine affection develops over time, that's a bonus. If it doesn't, we still have a foundation built on honesty and shared goals. Rebecca turned her attention to Salvatore. And you, Mr. Torino, what do you get from this arrangement besides political immunity? Salvatore's answer was measured but surprisingly personal. I get a partner who sees my son as a person rather than a burden. I get someone who understands complex legal situations and can help legitimize my business operations. And I get a wife who chose to be here rather than someone who was forced. You're not concerned about her motivations? Miss Bellecourt, I've spent 25 years in a business where people lie for survival. I can recognize genuine intelligence, authentic courage, and real compassion when I see them. His dark eyes flickered towards Sophia. Miss Martinez possesses all three. Rebecca was quiet for several minutes, her expression thoughtful. Finally she nodded. Mother, I support this arrangement. These people are entering into a partnership with clear terms, mutual respect, and shared goals. It's not the arranged marriage I was running from. It's something entirely different. Judge Bellecourt closed the laptop and turned to face them. Then I hereby approve this union and authorize the immunity arrangement. You have 47 minutes to complete the ceremony before my deadline expires. As she gathered her papers, Judge Bellecourt paused at the door. Miss Martinez, one final piece of advice. In my experience, the best marriages are built on partnerships first and romance second. You've got the foundation right. The rest will follow naturally. After she left, Sophia and Salvatore sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing what had just happened. That went better than expected, Salvatore said finally. Sophia's smile was genuine for the first time that morning. Mr. Torino, I think we're going to surprise a lot of people. Starting with ourselves. Starting with ourselves. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the November sky, and Chicago awakened to a day that would end with the most unusual wedding the city had ever witnessed. 36 minutes to transform a waitress into a bride. In Salvatore's world, miracles were usually accomplished with money, intimidation, or violence. But at 6:11 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, he discovered that sometimes they required nothing more than a phone call to the right person. Francesca owes me 3 favours from the Benedetti wedding, Marco explained, his fingers flying across his phone screen. She'll open her boutique and she won't ask questions. Sophia sat in the passenger seat of Salvatore's armoured Mercedes, watching Chicago blur past the bulletproof windows. The transformation from Romano's to Francesca's bridal had taken exactly 4 minutes, but the psychological distance felt immeasurable. An hour ago she'd been refilling coffee cups. Now she was planning her wedding to the most dangerous man in the city. "Second thoughts?" Salvatore asked quietly, noting the way her hands had finally begun to tremble. "Practical concerns," Sophia corrected. "I'm about to put on a wedding dress that costs more than my annual salary to marry a man I've known for 3 hours. A certain amount of nervousness seems appropriate." "You could your people are efficient." "When the alternative is federal prison, efficiency becomes a survival skill." Francesca Moretti emerged from the boutique as they approached, a woman in her 60s with silver hair, measuring tape draped around her neck, and the kind of sharp eyes that could assess a bride's measurements from across a room. She embraced Salvatore with the familiarity of old family connections. "Caro Salvatore," she said in accented English, "when Marco calls at this hour talking about emergency wedding, I think someone is dying. Then I remember, in your family, emergency wedding usually means someone is trying not to die." "Something like that, Francesca. This is Sophia Martinez, my bride." Francesca's experienced gaze swept over Sophia, taking in everything from her posture to her complexion to the way she carried herself. "Ah, the one who finally caught the wolf. I wondered when someone would be smart enough." Sophia extended her hand formally. "Mrs. Moretti, I appreciate you opening your shop at such an unusual hour." "Is nothing. Torino family. We take care of each other always." Francesca's expression softened as she studied Sophia more closely. "But you are not typical Torino bride, are you, Cara?" "No, ma'am. I'm not typical anything." Francesca's laugh was rich and knowing. "Good. Typical brides, they last maybe 6 months in this life. You, I think you last much longer." The interior of the boutique was elegantly appointed with crystal chandeliers, ivory silk walls, and enough mirrors to make even the most confident woman question her appearance. Sophia had never been in a space that cost more per square foot than her entire apartment. "We have maybe 25 minutes for complete transformation," Francesca announced, already pulling gowns from racks with practiced efficiency. "Lucky for us I have perfect dress. I make for Judge's daughter last month, but she runs away to Europe instead of getting married. Her loss, your gain." Sophia's eyebrows rose. "Judge Bellecourt's daughter?" "See, Rebecca, sweet girl but terrified of everything, not like you." Francesca held up a stunning ivory silk gown with delicate lace details. "This dress, it was made for someone with backbone, someone who chooses her own destiny instead of running from it." The symbolism wasn't lost on any of them. Sophia would be wearing the dress that Rebecca Bellecourt had rejected, transforming a symbol of coercion into one of choice. "It's beautiful," Sophia said quietly. "It will be more beautiful on you. Come, we try." The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of silk, lace, and expert tailoring. Francesca worked with the speed and precision of someone who had dressed 3 generations of brides, her hands flying as she pinned, adjusted, and perfected the fit. The dress transformed Sophia completely, from invisible waitress to elegant woman with the kind of presence that commanded attention. "Madonna mia," Francesca breathed, stepping back to admire her work. "Salvatore, you come see your bride." Salvatore entered the fitting area and stopped abruptly. The woman standing before the 3-way mirror bore little resemblance to the waitress who had served his coffee for 3 years. The dress showcased Sophia's natural elegance, but more importantly, her expression had changed. She looked like someone who belonged in designer clothing, someone who could walk into any room and command respect. "You look," he began, then stopped, apparently at a loss for words. "Like I could actually be your wife," Sophia suggested, studying her reflection with objective assessment rather than vanity. "Like you could be anyone's wife, like you could be a queen." The words hung in the air between them. carrying more weight than either had expected. In the mirrors surrounding them, they looked like a couple who belonged together. He in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, she in ivory silk that seemed to glow against her skin. Francesca bustled around them, making final adjustments. Shoes, jewellery, makeup, we have everything, but first you must practice. Practice what? Sophia asked. Being married couple. You stand too far apart, you look too formal. Judge Bellecourt, she has sharp eyes. She will know if you are strangers pretending to be in love. Sophia and Salvatore moved closer together, but their positioning was awkward, uncertain. They had the intellectual framework of their partnership, but no physical ease with each other. No, Francesca clucked disapprovingly. You look like business meeting, not wedding. Cara Sophia, you put hand on his arm. Salvatore, you look at her like she is most important person in room. Sophia placed her hand on Salvatore's forearm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the expensive fabric. He was warm, steady, and surprisingly comforting for someone she'd known for less than 4 hours. Better, Francesca approved. Now you, Salvatore, when you look at your bride, you must see not just beautiful woman, but partner. Someone who makes you stronger, smarter, better. Someone you trust with your life. When Salvatore followed the direction, something shifted in his expression. The calculating mask he wore in business situations softened into something more genuine, more personal. Sophia found herself looking back with equal intensity, seeing not just a powerful man who could solve her problems, but someone who valued her intelligence, respected her courage, and needed what she could offer. Ah, Francesca said with satisfaction. Now you look like couple who chooses each other. The boutique door chimed, and Marco appeared with a small entourage, hairstylist, makeup artist and photographer. 15 minutes, he announced. The chapel is prepared, the priest is waiting, and Antonio is dressed in his ring-bearer outfit. Antonio is coming? Sophia asked, surprised. Salvatore nodded. He specifically asked to be part of the wedding. Apparently he's been planning what he would say if I ever got married again. Sophia's expression softened completely. What did he say? That he wanted to give you his mother's rosary, to keep you safe. Salvatore's voice carried the vulnerability of a father who still grieved for his son's losses. He hasn't spoken about his mother to anyone in 18 months. The weight of that trust settled around Sophia like a mantle. This wasn't just about legal arrangements or business partnerships anymore. A traumatized child was choosing to share his most precious memory with her, trusting her with his father's happiness and his own future. Then we better not keep him waiting, she said quietly. The final preparations passed in efficient choreography, hair swept into an elegant chignon, makeup that enhanced rather than masked, jewellery that suggested refinement without ostentation. Sophia watched herself transform in the mirror, but the woman looking back was still recognisably herself, just elevated, polished, and ready to step into a world where intelligence and courage mattered more than background or blood. One last thing, Francesca said, producing a delicate lace veil. Something borrowed from my shop, something blue from the dress lining, something old from Antonio's rosary, and something new. She fastened a small diamond pendant around Sophia's neck. From the Torino family collection, welcome to the family, Cara. Sophia touched the pendant, feeling its weight and warmth. Mrs. Moretti, why are you being so kind to someone you've known for 20 minutes? Francesca's smile was knowing and gentle. Because in 20 minutes you have shown more grace under pressure than most brides show in 6 months of planning. Because you see Salvatore as a man, not just a monster. And because that little boy upstairs needs a mother who chooses to love him, not someone who tolerates him for his father's money. Outside, church bells began to chime, 6:40 a.m. 7 minutes until sunrise. 7 minutes until Sophia Martinez became Sophia Torino and changed the trajectory of her life forever. Ready? Salvatore asked, offering his arm. Sophia took a final look at herself in the mirror. The waitress was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she belonged in this world of power, danger, and unexpected tenderness. "Ready," she said, and meant it completely. As they walked toward the door, Francesca called after them. "Cara Sofia, one piece of advice for married life with Torino man. They are passionate, protective, and sometimes stubborn like bulls. But if you stand your ground with respect, if you show them you are partner, not possession, they will move mountains for you." Sophia smiled back at her. "Mrs. Moretti, I think Salvatore is about to discover that I'm fairly stubborn myself." The last thing she heard as they left the boutique was Francesca's delighted laughter, following them into the morning light where their new life was waiting to begin. Dawn broke over Chicago, like a promise finally being kept. The chapel of St. Alphonsus stood bathed in golden light, its Gothic spires reaching toward a sky painted in shades of rose and amber. Inside, the sanctuary that had witnessed a century of weddings prepared to host the most unusual ceremony in its history. Sofia Martinez was about to become Sofia Torino in front of God, the federal government, and a 6-year-old boy who hadn't spoken above a whisper in 18 months. The chapel was intimate rather than grand. Perhaps 50 pews, stained glass windows depicting saints who understood sacrifice, and an altar carved from Italian marble by craftsmen who had immigrated to Chicago 3 generations ago. It smelled of beeswax candles, old wood, and the white roses that Marco's people had managed to procure at dawn on a Tuesday morning. In the bride's chamber, Sophia stood before an antique mirror, adjusting the delicate veil that had belonged to Salvatore's grandmother. Her hands were steady now, the trembling of earlier replaced by calm resolution. She had made her choice. Everything that followed was simply execution. "Mija," came a soft voice from behind her. Sophia turned to find her grandmother's oldest friend, Elena Vasquez, whom Salvatore's people had somehow located and transported to the chapel within 30 minutes. The elderly woman's presence was both surprising and profoundly comforting. "Abuela Elena?" Sophia's composure cracked slightly. "How are you here?" "Your new husband. He sends cars for me. He says no bride should marry without family present." Elena embraced her gently, careful not to disturb the dress. "He also sends these." From her worn purse, Elena produced a small jewellery box containing pearl earrings that Sophia recognised immediately. Her grandmother's wedding earrings, the ones sold to pay for medical bills 2 months ago. "He bought them back." Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. "He found the pawn shop, paid 3 times what they offered, and had them cleaned and reset." Elena's weathered hands fastened the earrings with practised gentleness. This man, he understands what matters to a woman on her wedding day. Sophia touched the pearls, feeling their familiar weight and warmth. In 3 hours, Salvatore had managed to return something she thought was lost forever. The gesture spoke of thoughtfulness, attention to detail, and resources deployed not for intimidation, but for kindness. "Are you afraid, Mija?" Sophia considered the question seriously. "I'm marrying a man I've known for 4 hours who controls half the criminal activity in Chicago. I should be terrified." "But you're not." "No, I'm not." Sophia met her own eyes in the mirror, recognizing the woman looking back. "I'm nervous about the ceremony, anxious about the media attention, concerned about the legal complexities, but I'm not afraid of him. He sees me, Abuela Elena. For the first time in my life, someone sees exactly who I am and values it." Elena nodded with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed 8 decades of marriages, most of them far less promising than this one. "Your grandmother, she would be proud. You take chance for better life, but you do it with intelligence, with dignity, with terms that respect who you are." A soft knock interrupted them. "Miss Martinez, it's time." Sophia took a final look at herself. The woman in the mirror was elegant, composed, and ready to step into a new world. She was also still recognisably herself, the law student, the granddaughter of immigrants, the woman who had chosen partnership over safety. "Ready?" she said, and meant it. The chapel's main sanctuary was more crowded than expected. Judge Bellecourt sat in the front row, her expression serene but watchful. Behind her sat Marco, Anthony, and a dozen men who looked like they had stepped out of a Scorsese film, all perfectly groomed, all radiating the kind of quiet menace that suggested significant firepower beneath their expensive suits. But Sophia's attention fixed immediately on the small figure in the front row. Antonio Torino sat perfectly still in a miniature tuxedo, his dark hair combed with mathematical precision, holding a small velvet pillow with 2 wedding rings. His eyes, so much like his father's, tracked Sophia's movement down the aisle with solemn concentration. When she reached the front of the chapel, he stood and approached her with formal dignity. "Senora Sophia," he said in a voice barely above a whisper, "my papa says you will be my new mamma. I have something for you." From his jacket pocket he withdrew a delicate rosary with pearl beads worn smooth by decades of prayer, his mother's rosary, the one Salvatore had mentioned. The entire chapel held its breath. "This was Mamma's," Antonio continued, his voice gaining strength. "Papa says she watches from heaven and she wants you to have it, to keep you safe, to keep Papa safe, to keep our family safe." Sophia knelt to Antonio's eye level, accepting the rosary with hands that she willed to remain steady. "Antonio, this is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. I promise to take very good care of it and to take very good care of you and your papa. Promise you won't go away?" The question carried the weight of an 18-month-old trauma, the fear of a child who had already lost one mother. Sophia met his gaze directly, speaking the truth as clearly as she could. "I promise that if I ever have to go away, I will talk to you about it first. I will never disappear without saying goodbye, and I will always, always come back if you need me." Antonio studied her face with the intensity of someone far older than his years. Whatever he saw there satisfied him, because he nodded once and stepped back, resuming his position as ring-bearer with renewed dignity. Sophia rose and turned toward the altar, where Salvatore waited beside Father Martinez, a priest who had clearly been roused from sleep, but maintained professional composure despite the unusual circumstances. When their eyes met, she saw something in his expression that hadn't been there before, genuine warmth mixed with what might have been gratitude. Father Martinez began the ceremony with traditional words that carried unexpected weight in this context. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The familiar liturgy grounded the surreal situation in something timeless and sacred. Sophia found herself responding to the ancient rhythm of the ceremony, feeling the weight of commitment, even though the circumstances were extraordinary. "Salvatore Antonio Torino, do you take Sophia Elena Martinez to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Salvatore's voice was steady, carrying to every corner of the chapel. "I do." "Sophia Elena Martinez, do you take Salvatore Antonio Torino to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Sophia looked into Salvatore's dark eyes, seeing not just the dangerous man who controlled vast criminal enterprises, but the father who wanted stability for his traumatized son, the businessman who valued her intelligence, the partner who had spent precious time retrieving her grandmother's earrings because he understood what they meant to her. "I do," she said, her voice clear and certain. Antonio approached with the rings, performing his role with solemn pride. The rings themselves were simple platinum bands, elegant without ostentation, the kind worn by people who had nothing to prove to anyone. "With this ring I thee wed," Salvatore said, sliding the band onto Sophia's finger. His hands were warm, steady, and surprisingly gentle. The ring fit perfectly, and Sophia wondered when he'd had time to determine her size. "With this ring I thee wed," Sophia responded, placing his ring with equal formality. The platinum was warm from his skin, and she noticed the slight callus on his trigger finger, a reminder of the world she was entering. "By the power vested in me by the state of Illinois and the Holy Catholic Church, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Father Martinez's voice carried the authority of generations of priests who had performed this ceremony under circumstances both sacred and profane. "You may kiss the bride." The moment stretched between them, heavy with awareness that this kiss would be different from the perfunctory contact they had planned. They were no longer strangers negotiating a business arrangement. They were partners who had committed their lives to each other in front of God and family. Salvatore's hands cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones with surprising tenderness. When his lips met hers, the kiss was soft, reverent, and entirely genuine. Not the passionate embrace of lovers, but the respectful connection of two people choosing to trust each other with their futures. When they separated, Sophia saw something in Salvatore's expression that made her breath catch. He looked at her like she was precious, like she was chosen rather than convenient, like she was his wife rather than his solution. "Ladies and gentlemen," Father Martinez announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Salvatore Torino." The small congregation erupted in applause, with Antonio clapping loudest of all. Judge Bellecourt nodded approvingly, her expression suggesting that the ceremony had met her standards for authenticity and dignity. As they turned to face their guests as a married couple, Sophia felt the full weight of her transformation. She was no longer Sophia Martinez, law student and waitress. She was Sophia Torino, wife of the most powerful man in Chicago, stepmother to a traumatized child, and partner in enterprises both legitimate and otherwise. The receiving line was brief but significant. Judge Bellecourt embraced them both, whispering, "You've chosen well, both of you." Elena wept tears of joy, speaking rapid Spanish blessings that Sophia translated mentally. Antonio clung to Sophia's hand, his earlier formality giving way to childlike excitement. But it was Marco's reaction that surprised her most. The consigliere, who had objected to every aspect of their arrangement, approached with genuine respect. "Mrs. Torino," he said formally, "welcome to the family. I apologize for my earlier reservations. You have exceeded every expectation." "Thank you, Marco. I hope we can work together effectively." "I believe we will, ma'am. I believe we will." As the chapel bells chimed 7:15 a.m., Sophia and Salvatore walked down the aisle hand in hand, with Antonio between them chattering excitedly about the reception breakfast and asking if he could call her Mama Sophia now. Outside, Chicago was fully awake, traffic was building, and the normal world was beginning its Tuesday routine. But inside the black Mercedes that carried the new Torino family away from St. Alphonsus, everything had changed. Sophia looked at her wedding ring catching the morning light, felt Antonio's warm hand in hers, and met her new husband's gaze with calm satisfaction. She had gambled everything on a partnership with a dangerous stranger, and somehow, impossibly, it felt like the safest choice she had ever made. "No regrets?" Salvatore asked quietly. "None," Sophia replied, and discovered she meant it completely. Behind them, the chapel bells continued to ring, announcing to all of Chicago that the most unlikely love story in the city's history had officially begun. 1 week into her marriage to the most dangerous man in Chicago, Sophia Torino was discovering that the most challenging part wasn't the armed guards, or the federal surveillance, or the subtle threats from rival families. It was learning to live in a house where people actually cared whether she was happy. The Torino mansion sprawled across 3 acres of Lincoln Park like a fortress disguised as a palace. 18 rooms, bulletproof windows, and enough security equipment to protect a head of state. Sophia had grown up in a studio apartment where she could touch both walls by stretching her arms. Now she had a bedroom larger than her old apartment, a private bathroom with marble imported from Italy, and a walk-in closet that Francesca had filled with clothing appropriate for the wife of a don. But it was the small details that undid her composure. Fresh flowers replaced daily, groceries that included the specific brand of tea her grandmother had favoured, a security detail that had been instructed to take her anywhere she wanted to go, including law classes at the University of Chicago. "You're not sleeping," Salvatore observed on Thursday morning, finding her in the kitchen at 5 a.m., nursing her second cup of coffee while reviewing contract law. Sophia looked up from her textbooks, noting that he was already dressed in a charcoal suit despite the early hour. His dark hair was still damp from the shower, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him, leather, danger, and an underlying warmth that she was beginning to associate with safety. "I sleep," she said, which was technically true, just not much. "Adjustment period?" "Something like that." Sophia gestured toward the stack of legal documents on the kitchen island. "I've been reviewing the contracts for your legitimate businesses. There are opportunities for expansion that your current legal team seems to have missed." Salvatore poured himself espresso from the machine that cost more than most people's cars, studying her with the intensity she was learning to recognize. "Such as?" The shipping contracts with the city could be restructured to include waste management and construction. Vertical integration would increase profit margins by approximately 30% while reducing federal oversight. Sophia pulled out a document covered in her neat annotations. "Also, the real estate holdings in Chinatown are undervalued for tax purposes, but you could leverage them for legitimate development projects that would triple their declared worth within 2 years. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the security system and the distant sound of Antonio's alarm clock going off upstairs. Salvatore set down his espresso and moved closer, looking over her shoulder at the legal analysis that would have taken his current lawyers months to compile. "You did this in 1 week?" "I did this in 3 days. I've been working on it between classes and getting to know Antonio." Sophia's voice carried the quiet confidence she'd developed presenting cases in immigration court. "Your legal team is competent for basic compliance, but they're thinking defensively. You need someone who thinks strategically." Salvatore's hand brushed her shoulder as he leaned in to read her notes, and Sophia felt the now familiar warmth that spread through her whenever they were in close proximity. Their marriage might have begun as a business arrangement, but her body was developing its own opinions about their partnership. "You're suggesting we go fully legitimate?" "I'm suggesting you have the resources and connections to build an empire that doesn't require looking over your shoulder for federal agents." Sophia turned to face him, noting how the morning light filtering through the bulletproof windows highlighted the silver threading through his dark hair. The Torino name could be synonymous with legitimate power instead of criminal enterprise. Antonio could inherit businesses he'd be proud to claim publicly. Something shifted in Salvatore's expression at the mention of his son. Not surprise, but recognition that she understood what motivated him beyond money or territory. "And you'd want to be part of that transition?" "I'd want to lead it." Sophia's smile was small, but determined. "I didn't marry you just for security, Salvatore. I married you because I saw potential for something unprecedented, a criminal organization transitioning to complete legitimacy without sacrificing power or influence." The sound of small feet on the stairs interrupted their conversation. Antonio appeared in his Batman pajamas, hair sticking up in defiance of any attempt at order, clutching a stuffed lion that he'd recently confided was his secret bodyguard. "Mama Sophia," he said, the title he'd adopted naturally after the wedding. "Can you make the pancakes with the faces?" Sophia's heart did something complicated every time he called her that, not painful, but overwhelming in its tenderness. "Of course, Carino. Go brush your teeth while I get the batter ready." As Antonio thundered back upstairs with the enthusiasm of someone who had rediscovered joy, Salvatore watched Sophia move around the kitchen with growing appreciation. She had memorized Antonio's preferences, established morning routines that gave him security, and somehow made the sterile mansion feel like a home. "He talks now," Salvatore said quietly. "He always talked. He just needed someone who listened without trying to fix everything." Sophia cracked eggs into a mixing bowl with the efficiency of someone who had fed families on limited budgets. Children who've experienced trauma need consistency and patience. You can't rush healing. His therapist said the same thing. "Dr. Murphy is excellent. I've been reading her recommendations and implementing them at home." Sophia glanced at him sideways. "I hope you don't mind that I've been attending some of his sessions." She thought it would help with the family integration. Salvatore's expression softened completely. "You've been going to his therapy sessions?" "Family therapy specifically. Antonio is adjusting to having a stepmother, you're adjusting to having a wife, and I'm adjusting to having a ready-made family. Dr. Murphy suggested we work through the dynamics together." The pancake batter came together under her efficient hands, and soon the kitchen filled with the domestic scents of vanilla and butter. But Salvatore was less interested in breakfast than in studying this woman who had seamlessly inserted herself into the most complex parts of his life. "What does she say about the adjustment?" Sophia's smile was genuine and warm. "She says Antonio is thriving because he finally has a maternal figure who chose to be here. She says you're more relaxed because you're not carrying the entire emotional burden of parenting alone, and she says I'm adapting remarkably well to a situation that would traumatize most people." "And how do you feel about the adaptation?" Sophia paused in her pancake making to consider the question seriously. The honest answer was complicated. "I feel like I'm becoming who I was always meant to be. Not the invisible waitress hiding from the world, not the desperate student scraping for tuition money. Someone who belongs in a position of influence and responsibility." Antonio's return interrupted the conversation, but his chatter filled the kitchen with warmth that had been missing for 18 months. He told Sophia about his dreams, asked Salvatore about business meetings in terms a 6-year-old could understand, and generally behaved like a child who felt secure in his family's love and attention. "Papa, can Mama Sophia come to the company picnic?" Antonio asked around a mouthful of smiley-face pancake. Salvatore's expression grew complicated. "The company picnic is for employees and their families, Antonio. It's not really—" "I'd like to attend," Sophia interrupted gently. "If you think it's appropriate, I should meet the people who work for our family's businesses." "Our family's businesses," Salvatore repeated, something warm in his voice at her phrasing. "Unless you prefer to keep business and personal life separate." "No." His response was immediate and definitive. "You're right. You should meet everyone. You're going to be working closely with them." After Antonio left for school with his security detail disguised as a normal carpool arrangement, Sophia and Salvatore found themselves alone in the kitchen for the first time since their wedding morning. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged with awareness of how much had changed in 7 days. "There's something else we should discuss," Salvatore said, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for serious business. "The federal agents assigned to monitor our activities, they've been asking questions about you." Sophia's hands stilled on the coffee cup she'd been washing. "What kind of questions?" "Background checks, financial history, family connections. Standard procedure for the wife of someone in federal protection, but thorough." Salvatore moved closer, his presence both comforting and protective. "They found your immigration court testimony from 3 years ago. Apparently you impressed them with your legal knowledge and composure under pressure. Should I be concerned?" "On the contrary, Agent Rodriguez from the Chicago field office specifically requested to meet with you. He thinks you could be valuable as a consultant on other cases involving immigrant families and complex legal situations." Sophia turned to face him fully, recognizing an opportunity when she heard one. "You're suggesting I work with the FBI? I'm suggesting you have options beyond just legitimizing my businesses. Your expertise in immigration law, combined with your understanding of federal procedures, makes you valuable to multiple parties." Salvatore's expression was unreadable. "The question is whether you're interested in that kind of consulting work. Working with the people who have been investigating your organization? Working with the people who could provide additional legitimacy and protection for our family." His use of "our family" sent warmth through her chest. Agent Rodriguez isn't interested in prosecuting reformed organizations. He's interested in building relationships that help both sides achieve their goals. Sophia considered the implications while finishing the breakfast cleanup. Federal consulting work would provide independence, professional credibility, and a bridge between Salvatore's world and legitimate law enforcement. It would also demonstrate that their marriage had produced genuine benefits for both parties. "I'd like to meet Agent Rodriguez," she decided, "but I want you present for the initial consultation. Whatever arrangements we make need to serve our family's interests first." "Our family's interests," Salvatore repeated again, his voice carrying satisfaction. "I like the sound of that, Mrs. Torino." The way he said her married name sent shivers through her that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with growing attraction. 7 days of living in close proximity, sharing meals and conversations, and the daily intimacies of family life had created a foundation of genuine affection that surprised them both. "Salvatore," Sophia said quietly, setting down the dish towel and turning to face him completely. "About the sleeping arrangements," his expression grew carefully neutral. "If you're uncomfortable with anything about our current arrangement—" "I'm not uncomfortable, that's the problem." Sophia met his gaze directly, her cheeks flushing slightly but her voice steady. "I'm finding it increasingly difficult to maintain professional distance from a partnership that feels more personal every day." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken possibility. They had agreed on separate bedrooms, voluntary intimacy, and mutual consent for any changes to their arrangement. But theory was proving very different from practice, when practice involved shared breakfasts, family conversations, and the growing realization that their strategic marriage was evolving into something neither had anticipated. "Sophia," Salvatore said carefully, "I don't want you to feel pressured by proximity or gratitude or any sense of obligation." "I don't." Sophia stepped closer, close enough to catch that scent of leather and warmth that was becoming addictive. "I feel attracted to a man who values my intelligence, protects my family, and treats his son with tenderness. I feel drawn to someone who sees me as a partner rather than a possession." Salvatore's hands came up to frame her face with the same gentleness he'd shown at their wedding. "Are you saying you want to change our arrangement?" "I'm saying I want our arrangement to evolve naturally instead of being constrained by terms we negotiated when we were strangers." Sophia's voice carried the confidence she'd found in their partnership. "We're not strangers anymore, Salvatore. We're husband and wife, and I'm beginning to think we could be something more." When he kissed her this time, it was nothing like their wedding kiss. This was heat and hunger, 7 days of growing attraction and respect, culminating in the recognition that their strategic partnership had become something far more complicated and infinitely more valuable. They broke apart breathing hard, and Sophia saw in Salvatore's dark eyes the same surprise and desire that she felt coursing through her own body. "Mamma Sophia," Antonio's voice called from the front hall, accompanied by the sound of the front door opening. "I forgot my library book." They separated quickly but not guiltily, both smiling at the domestic interruption. Real life, Sophia was discovering, had a way of intruding on romantic moments in ways that somehow made them more precious rather than less. "We should continue this conversation later," Salvatore said quietly, his voice rough with interrupted desire. "Count on it," Sophia replied, and meant it completely. As Antonio retrieved his forgotten book and chatted about his day while being escorted back to school, Sophia realized that somewhere in the last week she had stopped thinking about the Torino mansion as Salvatore's house where she was staying. She had started thinking of it as home. 3 weeks into her new life as Sophia Torino, She was learning that happiness made you vulnerable in ways that desperation never could. When you had nothing to lose, fear was manageable. When you had a family worth protecting, terror became a constant companion disguised as normal life. The threat arrived on a Tuesday morning, hidden inside what appeared to be a routine flower delivery. Sophia was reviewing contract proposals in Salvatore's home office when Marco burst through the door without his usual courtesy knock, his face pale and his hand resting on the gun beneath his jacket. "We need to move you immediately," he said, his voice carrying the kind of urgency that made Sophia's blood run cold. "Both of you, and Antonio." Salvatore looked up from the shipping manifests he'd been studying, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to deadly focus in the space of a heartbeat. "Explain." "Moretti family, they hired Konstantin Volkov." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sophia didn't recognize the name, but the way both men went completely still suggested she should. "The Russian?" Salvatore's voice was silk over steel, the same one who took out the Benedetti Consigliere in Detroit and the prosecutor's wife in Miami. Marco's hands were shaking slightly, which Sophia found more terrifying than any overt threat. "He's been in Chicago for 3 days. Our contact at the airport just identified him from security footage." Sophia's legal training kicked in automatically. "Who is Konstantin Volkov?" Both men turned to her as if they'd forgotten she was in the room. Salvatore's expression was carefully controlled, but she could see the fear beneath his composed mask. "A professional assassin who specializes in killing the families of his targets," Salvatore said quietly. "His signature is making his target watch their loved ones die before eliminating them. He considers it a form of psychological artistry." The words hit Sophia like physical blows. Not just death, but calculated torture. Not just her life at risk, but Antonio's. The 6-year-old who had started calling her Mama Sophia and trusted her to keep him safe. "Why now?" she asked, surprised by how steady her voice remained. "Because our marriage alliance worked," Marco explained grimly. "The federal protection is holding. Judge Bellacourt's immunity deal is solid. The Morettis can't touch us legally, so they're going back to traditional methods." Sophia stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Antonio played most afternoons, now seeing potential sniper positions and escape routes instead of flowers and playground equipment. 3 weeks of domestic happiness had made her forget that she was living in a war zone. "What's the security assessment?" Salvatore asked. "The mansion is compromised. Too many sight lines, too many access points. We've identified at least 6 positions where Volkov could establish surveillance or take shots." Marco consulted his notes with professional efficiency. "The University of Chicago campus is a nightmare. Too many civilians, too many variables. And Antonio's school is off limits," Sophia finished firmly. "We don't disrupt his education or his therapy progress because of threats." Both men stared at her. Marco's expression suggested she had lost her mind. Salvatore's expression was more complex. Surprise mixed with something that might have been admiration. "Mrs. Torino," Marco said carefully. "This man has killed federal judges, mob bosses and their entire families. This isn't a situation where we maintain normal schedules." Sophia turned from the window to face them both, her expression calm but determined. "Then we don't maintain normal schedules. We create better security protocols, but we don't let a terrorist dictate how we live our lives, and we don't traumatize a child who's finally healing from his mother's death." "Sophia," Salvatore said quietly, "Volkov doesn't make mistakes. He's eliminated targets who had presidential-level security." "Then we don't rely only on security." Sophia moved to the desk and pulled out a legal pad, her mind already working through the problem with the same systematic approach she'd used for complex immigration cases. "We eliminate the threat." Marco's laugh was short and bitter. "Mrs. Torino, with all respect, this isn't a legal problem you can solve with paperwork." "Isn't it?" Sophia began writing rapidly, her law school training combining with 3 weeks of studying Salvatore's business operations. Konstantin Volkov is in Chicago illegally. He's using false documentation. He's preparing to commit multiple federal crimes, and he's targeting a family under federal protection." She looked up at both men, seeing their confusion. "We don't hunt him down like criminals. We hunt him down like lawyers. We use the system against him." Salvatore leaned forward, his expression shifting from protective concern to intense interest. "Explain." "Agent Rodriguez wants to meet with me about consulting on complex cases. I call him today and explain that we have intelligence about an international assassin operating in federal jurisdiction, targeting a family in witness protection." Sophia's voice gained confidence as the plan formed. "The FBI mobilizes resources we could never access privately. And if that doesn't work," Sophia's smile was small but sharp, "then we implement backup protocols that would make Volkov's previous targets look unprepared." For the next hour, Sophia demonstrated exactly why Salvatore had been right to value her intelligence. Her plan was multi-layered, combining federal law enforcement resources with private security measures and contingency protocols that accounted for every variable Marco could identify. "You want to use yourself as bait," Salvatore said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "I want to eliminate the threat before he can establish operational advantage." Sophia met his gaze steadily. "Volkov succeeds because his targets react defensively. They hide, run, wait for him to act. We're going to act first." "Absolutely not. Salvatore." Sophia's voice carried the authority she'd developed during 3 weeks of being taken seriously as an equal partner. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm explaining what's going to happen. You can either help me implement the plan effectively, or I'll implement it without your cooperation." The silence that followed was profound. Marco looked like he was witnessing a catastrophic breakdown of natural order. But Salvatore was studying Sophia with the intensity he usually reserved for life-or-death negotiations. "You understand," he said quietly, "that if this plan fails, if anything happens to you, Antonio loses another mother, and I lose." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence, but Sophia heard what he couldn't say, saw it in the vulnerability that cracked his composure. "Nothing is going to happen to me," she said firmly, "because I have too much to live for now." The phone rang, interrupting the charged moment. Marco answered with his usual efficiency, but his expression grew increasingly grim as he listened. "That was our contact at Antonio's school," he said after hanging up. "Unknown man asking questions about security procedures, pick-up protocols, and which children have private transportation." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Volkov wasn't just surveilling them, he was targeting Antonio specifically. Sophia's hands clenched into fists, and for the first time since the conversation began, her composure cracked completely, not with fear, but with a rage so pure and cold it made both men step back. "He looked at my son," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying more menace than any shout. "He's targeting a 6-year-old child who's already lost his mother." "Sophia," Salvatore began, but she was already moving toward the door. "No, this ends today, right now." Sophia's transformation was complete and terrifying. The composed legal consultant was gone, replaced by someone who had spent 28 years surviving in dangerous neighborhoods and would not allow anyone to threaten her family. "Marco, call Agent Rodriguez and tell him I have intelligence about an imminent federal crime. Salvatore, activate every security protocol we have, and both of you understand this clearly. Konstantin Volkov made a mistake when he looked at Antonio. He's about to discover exactly how dangerous that mistake was." As she left the office to begin implementing her plan, Sophia realized that somewhere in the last 3 weeks she had stopped thinking like someone who needed protection. She had started thinking like someone who would destroy anyone who threatened the people she loved. Behind her, Salvatore watched his wife disappear around the corner with an expression of pride, terror, and something that looked very much like love. Marco just looked terrified. Jesus Christ, Salvatore, Marco whispered. What have you married? Salvatore's smile was sharp with anticipation and dark with promise. I've married a woman who's about to remind everyone in this city why you don't threaten the Torino family. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Chicago, and the first drops of rain began to fall. By evening, those drops would become a deluge, washing away any trace of the man who had dared to target Sophia's son. The invisible waitress was truly gone forever. What remained was a woman who had found her family worth killing for, and the intelligence to do it without getting caught. The University of Chicago's law library had never been used as a battlefield before. But at 2:47 p.m. on a rain-soaked Wednesday afternoon, Sophia Torino was about to change that. She sat at her usual study table on the third floor, constitutional law textbooks spread before her like she was any other graduate student preparing for finals. Her wedding ring caught the grey light filtering through tall windows, and her hands remained perfectly steady as she highlighted case precedents. To any observer, she looked like exactly what she appeared to be, a dedicated law student focused on her studies. They couldn't see the ceramic knife taped under the table. They couldn't detect the federal agents positioned at strategic points throughout the building. And they had no idea that the woman calmly reviewing Supreme Court decisions had spent the previous 18 hours orchestrating the most sophisticated trap in Chicago's criminal history. Konstantin Volkov entered the library at 2:52 p.m. Sophia felt, rather than saw his arrival, a shift in the atmospheric pressure that made her skin crawl and her pulse quicken. She'd studied his photograph until she could identify him in a crowd, but seeing him in person was different. He was smaller than she'd expected, unremarkable in the way that made him perfect for his profession. Brown hair, average height, forgettable face, the kind of man who could kill your family and disappear into a crowd of commuters. He took a seat 3 tables away, opening a laptop and settling in like any other patron. But Sophia caught the subtle movements of his eyes as he catalogued exits, counted civilians, and assessed threats. Professional habits that would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't spent 3 years serving dinner to federal prosecutors while memorizing their security procedures. Her phone buzzed softly. A text from Agent Rodriguez. Target confirmed. All positions ready. Your signal initiates. Sophia typed her response without looking away from her textbook. Initiating contact in 3 minutes. She had exactly 1 chance to make this work. If Volkov suspected a trap, he would disappear and resurface weeks later when their guard was down. If the federal agents moved too early, he could claim he was simply researching in a public library. But if Sophia could get him to commit to an overt threat while being recorded by federal surveillance, they could eliminate him legally and permanently. At 2:55 p.m, Sophia stood and walked to the reference section, selecting a volume on international criminal law. As she passed Volkov's table, she stumbled slightly, dropping the heavy book. It landed with a sharp crack that echoed through the quiet library. "I'm so sorry," she said in fluent Russian, having spent 2 weeks learning key phrases for exactly this moment. How clumsy of me. Volkov's reaction was instantaneous and telling. His hand moved toward his jacket, a defensive reflex that confirmed both his identity and his armed status. When he realized she had spoken Russian, his expression shifted from mild annoyance to sharp interest. "No problem," he replied in the same language, his accent placing him precisely where Agent Rodriguez had predicted. Former Spetsnaz trained in Moscow, operating internationally for the past decade. Sophia picked up the book, allowing her wedding ring to catch the light. "Are you also studying law?" "In a manner of speaking." His smile was cold and practiced. "I'm particularly interested in family law, inheritance issues, what happens to children when parents disappear." The words hit Sophia like ice water, but her expression remained politely curious. Around them, other students continued their research, unaware that they were witnessing a conversation between a professional killer and his intended victim. "How interesting. I'm studying constitutional protections myself. Due process, equal protection, the rights that ensure families stay together. Sophia's voice carried just enough emphasis to let him know she understood his meaning. Amazing how the law protects innocent people from those who would harm them. Volkov's laugh was soft and genuinely amused. Mrs. Torino, I presume. You're even more beautiful than the photographs suggested. Sophia's blood turned to ice, but her hands remained steady as she closed the law book. I think you have me confused with someone else. Sofia Elena Martinez Torino, age 28, recently married to Salvatore Antonio Torino, stepmother to 6-year-old Antonio, law student at this very university. Volkov's voice was conversational, pleasant, like he was discussing the weather instead of reciting a death sentence. You've made quite an impression on certain people who are very unhappy with your husband's new associations. I'm not sure what you mean. The Moretti family sends their regards and their regrets that your marriage will be so brief. Volkov leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that wouldn't carry to other tables. They wanted me to tell you that your stepson is particularly adorable. Such a tragedy when children lose 2 mothers to unfortunate accidents. That was the moment Sophia stopped pretending to be afraid and allowed Volkov to see exactly who he was dealing with. Mr. Volkov, she said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded violence. You just made a mistake that's going to cost you your life. His expression shifted from confident amusement to sharp wariness. Excuse me? Sophia smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had spent weeks planning for this exact moment. You threatened my son in a federal building while being recorded by FBI surveillance equipment in front of witnesses who will testify to your stated intention to commit murder. Volkov's hand moved toward his weapon, but Sophia was already stepping back, her voice carrying clearly across the library. Agent Rodriguez, this is Sofia Torino. The subject has just verbally confirmed his intention to murder federal witnesses under protection and has indicated imminent threat to a minor child. I am requesting immediate federal intervention. The transformation was instantaneous and overwhelming. Students who had been quietly reading revealed themselves as federal agents, weapons drawn and aimed. Library patrons became tactical teams in civilian clothing. What had appeared to be a normal academic environment became the most sophisticated law enforcement operation in Chicago's history. Konstantin Volkov, Agent Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the authority of the federal government. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, terrorism, and violation of federal witness protection protocols. Volkov's hand froze halfway to his jacket. Around him, a dozen weapons were trained on his position, and he finally understood that he had walked into a trap designed by someone who thought several moves ahead. You played this very well, Mrs. Torino, he said, his voice carrying grudging respect. But you understand this doesn't end here. The Moretti family has resources beyond what federal protection can. The Moretti family, Sophia interrupted, is about to discover what happens when they threaten my family. She walked closer to Volkov, ignoring the federal agent's warnings to maintain distance. When she spoke, her voice was low enough that only he could hear. I want you to carry a message back to whoever hired you, she said in perfect Russian. Tell them that Sofia Torino is not the invisible waitress they thought they were targeting. Tell them I have spent 3 years memorizing the legal vulnerabilities of every federal prosecutor, immigration judge, and organized crime investigator in this city. Tell them I know how to destroy people using nothing but paperwork and patience. Volkov's expression shifted to something approaching fear. And tell them, Sophia continued, that if anyone looks at my son again, I will use every connection I've made, every favour I'm owed, and every legal loophole I've discovered to ensure they spend the rest of their lives in federal supermax prisons, watching their own families struggle without them. She stepped back, her voice returning to normal volume. Agent Rodriguez, I believe Mr. Volkov is ready to be processed. As federal agents moved in to arrest him, Volkov kept his eyes on Sophia, finally understanding that he had underestimated not just her security, but her intelligence, her resources, and her absolute determination to protect the people she loved. "Mrs. Torino," he said as handcuffs clicked into place, "you would have made an excellent assassin." Sophia's smile was warm and genuine. "Mr. Volkov, I make an even better lawyer." As they led him away, Sophia gathered her textbooks with hands that were completely steady. Around her, federal agents began securing evidence and processing the crime scene, but she was already thinking ahead to the next phase of eliminating the Moretti threat. Her phone buzzed with a text from Salvatore. "Status report," she typed back. "Target neutralized. Federal case solid, coming home to family." But first, she had one more call to make. She dialed a number she had memorized weeks earlier. "Judge Bellacourt, this is Sophia Torino. I have a proposition for you about permanently resolving the Moretti family problem. Yes, ma'am, I believe we can eliminate the threat using entirely legal means. Would you be available for a conference call this evening?" As Sophia walked out of the library and into the grey Chicago afternoon, she realized that somewhere in the last month she had stopped thinking like someone who reacted to threats. She had started thinking like someone who eliminated them entirely. The rain was falling harder now, washing the streets clean. By tomorrow, the Moretti family would discover that threatening Sophia Torino's family was the last mistake they would ever make. Behind her, the University of Chicago returned to its normal academic quiet. But the woman walking away was no longer a law student. She was a force of nature with a legal degree and the absolute determination to use it.